partnership. First slide, please. So we have a long-standing tripartite SDG partnership for Asia Pacific. Next slide, please. And this essentially focuses on a highly topical theme relating to the SDGs and Agenda 2030 every year. We have produced 6 reports so far. Normally they are launched in March at the Asia Pacific Forum for Sustainable Development, hosted by SGAP in Bangkok. 6 annual reports as well as 1 outlook report, and we also maintain an SDG data portal, which is concerned with monitoring SDG progress per country as well as per goal, and that is accessible through this QR code here or on the SDG partnership website. So we basically focus on a key topic every year. Next slide, please. So the 2022 partnership report, which was the one we did last year, was entitled Building Forward Together Towards an Inclusive and Resilient Asia and the Pacific. And it will come as little surprise to say that this focused very much on the pandemic and the pandemic's impacts on the Sustainable Development Goals in the region and various sub-regions, as well as looking at solutions and ways to address those impacts for member states and other stakeholders. Next, please. So every year, as you will know, the high-level political forum in July focuses on a few selected SDGs for a deep review. And last year, or rather this year in July, it was education, SDG 4, gender equality, SDG 5, as well as the environmental goals, a life below water and life on land. 14 and 15 respectively, in addition to SDG 17, which is reviewed every year. And so basically in our report, we looked at the impacts of the COVID pandemic, or rather the effects of the COVID pandemic on these goals, and we assessed that in depth. So I won't go through all of these impacts, but these are just a few examples. So for example, within the field of education, within the SDG 4 of education, school closures, prolonged school closures, reduced educational quality, as well as amount of education children were receiving. And there were various other challenges relating to accessibility of online education, distance learning, etc., which varied depending on various variables such as urban rural divides, as well as wealth disparities, etc., in various countries. We found that female students were disproportionately We found that female students were disproportionately affected. Sorry, can we just go back to the previous slide, please? With many of them having to take on sort of care burdens for family members at home in domestic situations. So looking at gender, for example, as I mentioned, there was an increased burden of care, unpaid care work. And then there was also an increase in gender-based violence, as well as other forms of gender inequality, such as child marriage, for example, in various parts of Asia Pacific. Life below water and life on land. So while there was a temporary drop in emissions, and of course, air travel reduced significantly for a temporary period, there was a huge surge in medical waste and plastic waste, and this caused immense environmental challenges as well. In addition, the decline in tourism, while in some ways, positive for the environment in terms of emissions and air travel, etc., was also detrimental in the sense that ecotourism or community-based tourism projects completely evaporated and ceased to operate during this period. And so there was both sort of pros and cons in terms of the effect on the environment, but these are the main impacts that we saw from the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide, please. So one of the key lenses, if you like, that we adopted in this report was looking at this concept of the K-shaped recovery. So that is to say that different countries, different sub-regions, as well as different communities and groups within countries, clearly were recovering from the pandemic at different speeds, at different paces, with different trajectories. It was not a sort of consistent pattern, but it was hugely variable depending on various factors. Now, those factors are innumerable, but we focused on 6 key factors that we saw as influencing the dynamics of recovery processes in countries of Asia Pacific, namely vaccination rates. So the extent to which governments were able to vaccinate their populations speedily had a huge impact in terms of their recovery process. Secondly, social protection systems, including the use of technology and pre-existing social protection programs, such as, for example, we see in Pakistan, highly developed social protection programs. Those were also instrumental in terms of determining how well the governments and member countries were able to respond to the pandemic's effects. Digitalization. So throughout the pandemic, we saw a huge uptake in digital technology and the use of technology deployed, for example, for online learning or remote healthcare, etc., and the ability of governments to adopt digital technologies and to build capacities and systems to deploy those technologies was also incredibly pivotal in terms of determining their recoveries. The fundamental economic structures of countries, the extent to which they were overly focused, for example, on one industry, such as tourism or garments, for example, or to what extent they were diversified in terms of economic structure. That was a huge factor as well, because that also affected their ability to recover in different sectors of the economy, whereas those economies in those countries or societies that were overly dependent on one industry, so for example tourism in Pacific Island countries, that was extremely detrimental to their recovery processes. Environmental risks as well. The pandemic really highlighted the close relationship between nature and as well as health, human health systems. And lastly, fiscal space. So the extent to which governments had fiscal space determined their ability to respond and apply stimulus packages, especially in the areas of health, social protection, education, etc., in order for emergency response to the pandemic, as well as longer-term recovery from the pandemic's effects. So these were the 6 key factors that we saw as influencing the K-shaped recovery between countries as well as within countries themselves. Next slide, please. In terms of policy priorities, looking forward, so we always have in these reports, looking at the impacts, but then we also have forward-looking kind of priorities and areas that countries and different stakeholders should look towards in terms of actionable solutions. We identified inclusion as key. The pandemic created huge disparities and accentuated differences between different geographical groups, between the wealthy and those in poverty, and so inclusion, by which we also refer to gender inclusion, as well as vulnerable groups, was a key priority for member states going forward that we identified. Women's enhancing gender equality, of course, not least because gender equality was one of the high-level political forum goals under review, was the second key policy priority we identified in last year's report. And then environmental sustainability, which refers to this concept of a resilient, inclusive and resilient green economy. So, accelerating that green transition in societies of Asia Pacific and in countries of Asia Pacific was the third policy priority area that we pinpointed. In terms of putting policies into action, so these are kind of broad brush action points or action agendas that we proposed in our report as recommendations. So, for example, raising ambition in terms of aligning recovery strategies with the 2030 agenda, using the SDGs framework in terms of integrating that into recovery plans and recovery strategies was something that we proposed as a priority. Secondly, reinvigorating financing. So the SDG financing gap, as we know, is immense globally and regionally. And so looking at different forms of financing in terms of public, private, domestic, international sources of financing, increasing government revenues and increasing their ability to finance their development is absolutely critical. And that was the second sort of action area that we identified. And lastly, defining regional cooperation. As you can imagine, ADB, ESCAP and UNDP as regional organizations working in Asia Pacific, regional cooperation mechanisms, regional cooperation forms of technology transfer, South-South cooperation, lessons learned, best practices, etc., was a third action area that we identified as well. Next slide, please. I will now hand over to my colleague from ESCA, Madhu, who will take you through the current report that we are working on together for 2023. Over to you, Madhu.
Thank you, Frank. Good afternoon, participants and colleagues. I will now talk you through the focus areas of the 2023 SDG Partnership Report, which will be on delivering the SDGs through the energy, food, and finance nexus. It will look at the interconnected nature of energy, food, and finance systems and how they affect the development outcomes. We will also highlight the need for effective regional cooperation and partnerships across the Asia-Pacific region. Next slide, please. The context which leads us to the theme of 2023 report is that we live in a time of multiple crises prompted by the COVID-19 pandemic, climate change, and disruptions to key systems. We already heard about some of these challenges in the previous sessions, and also evidenced by the 2022 partnership report, the pandemic has set back decades of development progress and further widened inequalities. We also note that these multidimensional stressors are triggering a financial crisis. This means that vital funds for food security, energy transition, and social protection are all drying up and affecting the most vulnerable people. Meanwhile, the impact of climate change has also intensified. We see this with the natural disasters affecting countries heavily. The disruptions to key systems translate into rising energy, commodity, and food prices, and higher inflation is affecting our everyday life and leading to a cost of living crisis. This is particularly affecting the vulnerable and poorest of our population. Continued disruptions in global supply chains are also heavily affecting food security and supplies in the region. Agriculture productivity in the Asia-Pacific region has also been very energy dependent and has unfortunately brought huge environmental and social costs. Next slide, please. So just briefly, I would like to highlight the structure of the 2023 SDG Partnership Report. It will have 3 sections. The first section will analyze the impact of the crises at the nexus of food, energy, and finance sectors. And it will also make specific references to the SDGs 6, 7, 9, 11, and 17, which are the SDGs under review at the high-level political forum next year. The analysis will also consider sub-regional dimensions of these issues and identify the commonalities across countries, as well as the special circumstances in which countries are particularly vulnerable or disadvantaged. So the second section will focus on finding solutions. We will highlight good practices, innovative solutions to the triple crisis, and also find solutions that address the interlinked impacts of the food, energy, and finance issues. The report, as mentioned before, will also draw on sub-regional consultations, such as this session today. And the final section of this report will be forward-looking and identify key actions and policy recommendations and pathways to realize SDG transformations in the Asia-Pacific region. Next slide, please. So finally, it is also important to look at addressing the crises in food, energy, and finance sectors through SDG 17. We can see how several targets under SDG 17 are linked to tackling the food, energy, and finance challenges. For instance, mobilizing and tapping into additional financial resources, including leveraging private sector investment, is critical in times of these fiscal stresses. In conclusion, I would like to highlight that this report, which is currently at drafting stage, will be launched in March next year at the Asia-Pacific Forum on Sustainable Development in Bangkok. Final slide, please. Many thanks for listening, and here you can see the QR code to explore the 2022 report. And I will conclude the presentation now, and back to you, Oliver. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Madhu. Maybe a round of applause to you and Frank for the presentation of these 2 reports. I think maybe to make it a little bit more lively, can I just see a show of hands of everyone who has a smartphone on them here today? Hold up your hand if you have a smartphone. I'm sure not everyone's hand is going to go up now, aren't they? Great, because we are going to be doing a short online poll. My colleague Kayla, if she can maybe share her screen, if you could give access to Kayla. What we want to do here is we're just going to ask you 3 simple questions. There's no wrong or right answer. We want to have your views on some of the challenges and what might be some solutions to these challenges in the region. So if you pull out your phones, and you can either scan this QR code, or you can go to the website Slido, slido.com. Feel free to do it here as well. Go onto that slide, slido.com, and if you enter that number 2008222, you'll see these 3 questions on your screen, and you can select one of the answers. Now, we've been doing this in the other sub-regional events, and it's also interesting for us maybe to see how views on priorities of financing, for instance, differ within the sub-regions. So I would appreciate if you can do that. And this is a live poll, so as you put in your response, I'm not saying answer, your response, this will be updated as we speak. So the first question is, what could have the most impact in the South and Southwest Asia region to reinvigorate public and private finance for sustainable development? And there are a number of 4 essentially suggestions that we have. Please do tap on the ones that you think might be the most relevant to you. All right, we'll give you 1-2 minutes maybe. And maybe Kayla can update us how many responses we have received, and when we maybe want to move on. On the screen, 11 responses. I'm sure we can do better than 11 responses so far. There must be at least 40. Yeah, there must be at least 40 people here in the room with a smartphone. Okay, great. Okay, so we do see some interesting responses. It seems to be that most participants so far think that creating an enabling environment seems to be maybe the issue in this region. That's not the same that we've had in other regions as well. Improving tax administration seems to be the bottom. That's maybe not a result I would have expected, given that tax revenues are quite low in some of the countries here in this region. So maybe it's not a concern of tax administration, but maybe something else. Great. Let's maybe move to the next question. Thank you, Kayla. The next active poll. What do you think, what policies are the most important to enhance food security in South and Southwest Asia? So we've got 3 questions there. Do you think it's increased investment in innovative technologies, improving governance, combating corruption, increasing regulation, environmental standards, trade policies maybe to protect the least developed countries, or policies of income to support small and mid-sized farmers? Okay, we have questions, responses rolling in. Okay, here the responses went faster. We already have 20 coming in so far. And it seems to be here that innovative technologies is taking the lead, followed by policies aimed at protecting small and mid-sized farmers. Great. And maybe let's move on to the last question, please. Okay, thank you very much. What is required to foster the transition to a more sustainable energy in South and Southwest Asia? What do you think is required? Do we need more increased public and private investment? Do we maybe need greater incentives, tax incentives, for instance, or subsidies for investment in renewable energies? Maybe it's about more public awareness for the impact on fossil fuels on climate change, or do we need more cooperation and knowledge sharing at the local and sub-regional and regional levels? Okay, so I think this is a pattern that we have seen in some of the other regions as well. It seems to be often about the greater incentives for investment in renewable energy, that the incentives are maybe lacking a little bit for the private sector to undertake these costly investments in renewable energy. All right, excellent. I think this gives us some interesting things to think about, which we'll be picking up and maybe seeing how these views differ across the 5 regions that ESCAP has. Thank you very much. We do have actually quite a full program today, so I think we'll move forward with our panelists. We have 8 distinguished panelists, and I will not be doing a lengthy round of introductions. I think we'll start off immediately. I think in the interest of time, if I could ask everyone to limit their interventions to 3 to 4 minutes. I know it's very short. I will come in after 4 minutes and ask you to wrap up quickly. Maybe I can start. There is a different order on different sheets of paper which I've received. So I think I'd like to maybe start off immediately to my right to ask Professor Hemanti Rana Singh, who's a senior professor and member of the Sustainable Development Council of Sri Lanka, and we've already heard speaking over these few days. As we heard, the 2023 partnership report is looking at the ongoing crisis and the link between food, energy, and finance systems. Now, maybe you can tell us a little bit how these ongoing crises have affected, for instance, the food and agricultural system in South and Southwest Asia countries. And where do you kind of see unique opportunities that this sub-region could have to address these crises? Over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Oliver, and my distinguished panelists and delegates. So, in fact, I would not reiterate on the crisis, although Sri Lanka is even harder hit than others, I would say, because, with the pandemic and we had this economic downturn, and also the Easter tax and all that. So we were rather unfortunate with regard to our socio-economic situation. So therefore, we had more problems with regard to especially the supply chains, the the supply chains, as well as the fertilizer, because in fact, the government decided at this moment that we should go for organic agriculture, so that the inorganic fertilizers were banned. Although there was a lot of discussion about this, but it was banned at the same time simultaneously. So with that one, the farmers were not really ready for that. So therefore, the yields of agriculture, especially paddy, really got reduced. So then it really almost led to a food crisis in the country. So along with the climate change, which everybody is affected, which especially most of Sri Lanka is having rain-fed agriculture. So therefore, when this rain doesn't come on time, or when it comes, it's so erratic. So it really caused problems in the sowing of paddy as well as the harvest, and not only paddy but other agricultural crops also. So I mean, without much ado, I won't dwell on those things, but I must say that the country, with regard to the nationally determined contributions, which they submitted to the UNFCCC in 2021, and other agreements like the net zero by 2050, it has come up with a lot of solutions. But first, of course, even we needed food aid, and FAO and some other donors even came up because there was malnutrition problems because of the causes, the reasons that I spelled out. But now country is slowly and surely moving forward, and it's not jumping to inorganic agriculture, but it's really going to integrated agriculture, so that both organic and inorganic agriculture could be, integrated to have better solutions, especially for the environment as well. And also with regard to climate change, the climate, we are promoting climate smart agriculture, which has so many components, selection of proper crops, which needs less water or which can thrive on, flood conditions also temporarily, and early warning systems so that people could know when to sow and when to harvest. And then using technologies like the smartphones so that the farmers will be updated on the weather patterns, and also using renewable energy like the solar energy for various practices like the drip irrigation and the other things which really needs energy in the agriculture to resort to renewable energy. So, I mean, and also using selecting areas which are really good for agriculture and resorting to that and putting more emphasis on that, and also going for a nutrient use efficiency, which means that selecting, really doing the take all these chemical, the soil and other environmental parameters to decide the optimum level of agrochemicals required, so that it will be put and will be concentrated on high yielding crops, so that the emitting of the nitrogen to the atmosphere as well as the waste of resources on the agrochemicals can be reduced. So I think my 3 minutes are approaching, and Oliver is looking at me. And so I must say that this is a forum where we could learn from each other, which I'm really thankful to ESCAP and also to other partners, including the government of Pakistan, for giving us this opportunity to share experiences, because SDGs, we all have submitted, all our countries. So we have really spread out how we could really, work towards climate resilient world, including today's discussion, agriculture, energy, and finances. So, so let's all get together and try to keep our promises, but definitely we need support from each other. So technology, we need support, I would say, and also for other areas where we could share experiences, that would be the way forward. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, Hamanti, telling us about some of the challenges that you had. It was actually 5.5 minutes. You see, it's very difficult for me to cut people off when I find they're telling us some interesting stories about the challenges, for instance, in food security that they have. Thank you very much, and it won't come at the expense of other persons' times. Let me maybe move to the next panelist, and I'd like to hand over to Mr. Mohammed Masood Rana Chowdhury, Joint Secretary of the ERD, Ministry of Finance, Bangladesh. It'd be interesting to hear from you how the food and finance crisis is potentially affecting Bangladesh and what steps have been taken. I know, over to you. You'd like to go over there? Sure, thank you very much.
Hello everyone. I hope you have
microphone. Maybe you can turn the microphone on.
Hello everyone. Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon. I hope you have had a very good lunch today, because I found all the items very delicious. And thanks the organizer for providing this food for us. Actually, starting from our SDG formulation back in 2015, when we are proceeding very nicely, but then we face the COVID situation. And when COVID is running on, we face another conflict, Russia and Ukraine. We don't know what is coming next. But anyway, we are ready to face every hurdles. Actually, what the items you have mentioned, I will just give the brief statement or brief on Bangladesh position on these issues: food security, energy, and financing nexus. But I will take care about your time. Okay, thank you. Actually, Bangladesh has been playing an active role in the global discourse for implementing the SDGs. And you know that since its independence, Bangladesh has earmarked food security as one of its top priority. Bangladesh has made remarkable growth in agriculture and food production, keeping pace with its population growth. Despite population growth over time, the country has attained full self-sufficiency at the aggregate level and increased calorie availability. A significant increase in domestic food production, improved household income access, and strengthens the social safety net programs all contributed to higher per capita food availability. Food safety and social protection programs, which have a favorable effect on the food security of the poor, are funded in large part by our national budget. Coronavirus pandemic has affected the agricultural production and supply system in many countries. However, despite such crisis, Bangladeshi farmers have given the country a good harvest. To ensure the food and nutrition security and to ensure safer food for the citizens, Government of Bangladesh has been implementing several projects. Additionally, the government has undertaken a number of steps to meet the Sustainable Development Goal objectives and end hunger by 2030. Another issue about energy. Energy is a strong instrument for economic growth and human development, which leads to a strong both-way correlation between economic development and energy utilization. Demand for power in Bangladesh is increasing day by day. Moving towards energy sustainability will require development not only in the way energy is supplied, but in the way it is used as well. Energy efficiency and renewable energy are said to be the twin pillars for sustainable energy. In Bangladesh, the power sector has experienced considerable progress in meeting the demand for electricity, and the level of electricity consumption have significantly increased over the years. Bangladesh has set a target to produce 10% of total power generation from the renewable sources by 2030. But Bangladesh will require investment of total USD 35 billion in the power generation sector alone by 2041. Total investment requirements in the energy sector add up to 2.5% of GDP per year. You know that SDG Goal 17 articulate multi-stakeholder partnership, needs for mobilizing resources and transferring technology through innovation and sharing knowledge in achieving the SDG by 2030. In Bangladesh, the SDG need assessment and financing strategy has identified that we need $928.48 billion additional funding from 2017 to 2030 to fully implement the SDGs. And annual average estimate would be required $66.32 billion. Of the additional required resources, domestic financing will be the 85.1%, and the external financing will be 14.9%. But the good thing is that Bangladesh has witnessed a paradigm shift in development cooperation. There is huge qualitative improvement in resource mobilization along with capacity utilization. Both commitment and disbursement of assistance have recorded an upward trend over the last decade. In the last 12 years, Bangladesh mobilized US $99.81 billion, which is 4.2 times higher than the previous 12 years. And similarly, development partners disbursed US $50.55 billion in the same period, which is 2.75 times higher than the previous 12 years. Along with the traditional development partners, some southern countries have emerged as important source of economic and technical cooperation for the global south, including Bangladesh. For Bangladesh, I'm coming to the last point. For Bangladesh, smooth implementation of the SDGs is a priority for which the country is continuously putting its focus on mobilizing resources for green and inclusive development, following prudent internal and external strategies. An effective coordination mechanism is important to ensure result-oriented partnership management within the government and between the government and development partners. The fundamental of the partnership between the government and development partners is that it should be rooted deep in the spirit of equal partnership. Thank you all for patient sharing.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chowdhury, for talking about the importance of partnerships for Bangladesh's development. Interesting how you've really come up with quite concrete estimates of resources that are needed and how these will be split between domestic and external partners. I think that's definitely interesting. I'd like to move on to the next presenter or panelist, and this is my colleague, Ms. Rupa Chanda, who's the director of our Trade, Investment and Innovation Division in Bangkok. She'll be joining us online. I hope you're doing well, Rupa, and I think the audience would like to hear I mean, as we know, the current crises in the food and energy sectors have, of course, had very strong trade and investment dimensions. Rising trade costs and logistic costs have contributed to soaring food prices. Maybe you could highlight a little bit to us how maybe trade and logistics can actually help to tackle these crises in food and in finance. Over to you, Rupa. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks, Oliver, for this opportunity to present some views. So I should start by saying that trade and logistics have both been impacted by the crisis as well as contributed to the crisis, because we know that the disruptions in supply chains and logistics and connectivity and all of this has really had an impact on the pricing of food, energy, access to essentials. And also there's been a lot of alteration in terms of the trade patterns, and the logistics costs have gone up because of all the uncertainties as well as other practices, which I'll come to later. If you also look at proxies like how much exposure countries have in terms of their net food imports relative to GDP or energy imports, you see that these are the countries that have been most impacted, and many of them are the LDCs, including ones in this region. Now, how could trade and logistics play a role, and also investment play a role in addressing the food and energy security problems we're seeing? I'd break it down in terms of certain short-term measures and unilateral measures, as well as more medium-term measures which require coordination and cooperation among countries. If you look at the unilateral measures, well, trade policies can play a very important role. That is temporary trade liberalization, trade facilitation for affected products, which can relieve the pressure on consumer prices. That means reducing import tariffs, relaxing import quotas, reducing non-tariff measures, as well as easing regulatory burden associated with trade procedures at the border. Another would be, of course, avoiding export restrictions, or at least signaling that you would not be putting in place export restrictions on affected products to prevent shortages in the world market. We know that some countries put export bans, which only aggravated the shortages and made the inflationary pressures worse. Also, post the pandemic, another very important unilateral step, I would say, and that countries have already embarked on, is to accelerate digital trade facilitation, because that can really bring down trade costs, shorten delivery times, and in the case of agricultural goods, can also reduce the losses in perishable agricultural products. But of course, these are not sufficient. What is really needed is a more of a coordinated approach, more cross-border cooperation, and that's really only possible in the medium term. So I think countries have to start sort of anticipating such future crises, and to avert them, or at least avert the sort of incidents that we've seen of these crises, you need mechanisms if they don't exist. Now, this requires medium-term planning and strategic vision relating to both trade and logistics and connectivity. Now, what are some of these possibilities? One is, of course, to diversify trading partners as well as logistics routes. So countries have to diversify their sources of imports for essentials. It's not possible in all cases because there are some very dominant suppliers, and it may not be cost effective. But that's where bilateral and regional trade agreements can play a role in helping you diversify your partners, not only for imports, but I would say also in finding new markets to ease the stress that we've seen in some countries on their balance of payments. On the logistics and connectivity side, we need to find alternative transport corridors. And again, this is not a near-term measure. This is something that requires investment in terms of capacity. There's a lot of infrastructural and operational issues, so that requires longer-term planning. Apart from that, as I mentioned, leveraging modern technology for seamless and resilient cross-border connectivity through digitalization, electronic data exchange, that can really significantly improve logistics efficiency. And we do have, even in ESCAP, we have the framework agreement on cross-border paperless trade. So you need some sorts of framework agreements or arrangements so that you can bring together countries for cooperation in infrastructure, in logistics, connectivity, and trade facilitation. So I would summarize and say that basically I see three elements. One is trade diversification and facilitation strategies to enable resilience, improve trade efficiency, and bring down trade costs. Second is to improve and diversify connectivity. And third is regional integration and other frameworks which would help countries to cooperate and provide institutionalized mechanisms that you could leverage in times of crisis. I think some of the agreements which already exist need to bring in some sort of provisions for countries to cooperate better in times of crisis. So maybe some sort of model provisions or basic principles so that countries do not get into this sort of reactionary policies of putting tariff barriers or export restrictions and things which make the shortages worse. There are, of course, several sub-regional examples we've seen where this has happened. I won't say that these have been implemented. ASEAN would be one example. BIMSTEC has recently also adopted a master plan for transport connectivity. So I think there are sub-regional examples which give hope that maybe these medium-term sort of cross-border cooperation and connectivity efforts can help at least mitigate the impact of future crises. I'll stop here. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, Rupa, for some of the issues you mentioned, differentiating between medium and long-term measures. Common thread that I also saw is that you highlighted the importance of digital tools, digitalization, which we kind of heard also from Hemanti talking about agriculture. No? Great, thank you. I'd now like to pass the floor over to Mr. Daniran Sharma, who is head of the Monitoring and Evaluation Division of the National Planning Commission of Nepal.
Yeah.
I'd like to, or the audience, I hope, would like to hear from you a little bit more about data and monitoring, how these essentially play an important role in government accountability and SDG commitments, and how you've been working on improving data monitoring.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, Mr. Moderator, distinguished panelists, delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it's very good opportunity to be here as a panelist. Regarding the importance of data and monitoring, it is obvious that data plays the essential role to examine the uneven progress and push policymakers to adopt the necessary actions for resolving the problems. Similarly, monitoring activities always right track the actions and activities to pursue the goals and objectives. Definitely, data and monitoring are vital tools to make the government accountable and responsible to achieve the SDG commitments. So how can we measure the positive impact that we are making towards the 2030 agenda if we don't have proper tool to measure it? We cannot know what we cannot measure. And I believe that one of the main difficulties to know what is going on in its country, community, and organizations in terms of sustainable development is that there is not enough reliable and high quality information that tracks the SDGs. Organizations without the funding or capacity to develop well-designed, modern practice and systems cannot easily sort and analyze their own data. That is a huge barrier to share quality information. Data sets are often not standardized within our cross organization that may be incomplete and incompatible with international standards. Similarly, collecting the data on sustainable development requires special care and attention. Collection must employ sound methodology to ensure data integrity and confidentiality. Protecting the integrity of data and identify and privacy of surveyor is of paramount importance once data has been collected, standardized, and aggregated. Certainly, the collection of and analysis of SDG data is a challenge that needs to be addressed as soon as possible to facilitate ways to measure the impact of initiatives that are being developed in communities and cities around the globe. Because if we do not measure our actions, they are not tangible at all. So we need to find innovative ways to find strategic partnership to systemize and analyze information that allow us to share quality data that are monitoring and globally progress we have made in sustainable development. In case of Nepal, we are facing the problem of high quality data, as most of the progress on the indicators should be collected from the local levels. So we have developed the national data portal in which the local governments are supposed to put the data. However, the local levels are lack of knowledge that how can they produce the data in most of the indicators. Therefore, the accuracy of data is always questionable. Similarly, the large number of projects and programs are being implemented by 3 layers of government of Nepal, in which forces the achieving SDG commitments. However, because of the lack of integrated monitoring mechanism, the problems are not timely corrected from the policy level that results in allocated budget is unspent. The government do have MIS for monitoring now, but it should be more expanded to capture the SDG activities. Therefore, I would like to emphasize the importance of SDG data portal based on the indicators. I don't think we have other options to collect the data from the local units of the government. The data portal will give the real-time information about the situation. However, in order to have more accurate and standardized data, we need to invest in the capacity development, capacity building of the local agencies. Likewise, the SDG indicators should not only be reflected in the budget and program, but it should be closely monitored through information technology that gives a real-time information and that provides feedbacks on time for correction, if any. Otherwise, the indicators remain unimplemented. Therefore, systematic monitoring is an essential for the successful achievements of SDGs. In Nepal, we are developing the integrated monitoring tracking system in which each and every activities of the federal governments are monitored through IT system. The selection for monitoring will be based on the progress report that obtained from the IT system. The monitoring activities and the recommendations or suggestions from the monitoring will be recorded in the system. The monitoring agency can easily monitor the progress report of the past monitoring. Therefore, this kind of tracking system would help to ensure the implementation of the activities that ultimately help to achieve the SDG targets and indicators. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much for highlighting the importance of data. You mentioned a data portal. The National Planning Commission has an SDG data portal online where they have the data publicly available. Right, okay, that's interesting. That's interesting. I'll have to have a look at that. Thank you very much. For the next presentation, I'd like to ask Mr. Rafiullah Kakar, who's a member of the Social Sector and Devolution Ministry. He's not here? All right, okay. Then my list is, sorry, not up to date. Great, then maybe I can ask Ms. Shaita Aisha, who is she's sitting over there, Chief of the Executive Officer of Seed Ventures Pakistan. Thank you for joining us here in person and addressing the challenges of finance, food, and energy require innovative approaches, as well as sustainable inclusive financing models and partnerships. I'd appreciate if you could maybe tell us about some interesting country-led experiences that one might be able to gather from Pakistan or other countries in the region. Over to you, please. Yes, okay. Now you are.
Yeah. So in terms of public-private partnerships within the food and the energy sector, there's a report by the Asian Development Bank that talks about where most of the public-private partnerships in Pakistan have been, and we see a very strong concentration in the energy sector. You know, one of the, I think, landmark projects would be the Singh Engro coal mining project. In terms of country investments in Pakistan, it has primarily been within the energy sector, whether you look, and two of the main countries that have invested in this particular area have been the United Kingdom and China, but it has primarily been towards energy and infrastructure. If we look at food and considering in the aftermath of the floods, I think this is fairly a sector that is you know, it is ignored because there is not much investment, whether from a public perspective or a private sector perspective, in developing the capacity of the farmer bodies and the local farmers and improving their ability to produce better agricultural produce. We're not investing in agri-processing, which is a big area. Just recently, we completed a study on the chili producing capital of Pakistan on Kundri in Umarkot. And, you know, one of the things that we identified, which is a potential area where a public-private partnership can actually take place, is that developing a consolidated data bank in terms of how much is being produced, what are the lacks in the supply of the chili, what can be done in order to set and standardize the pricing. And other than that, opening this market to the international market, because our red chilies are in high demand in Europe, you know, if they were produced to a certain standard. But all of this would require good public-private partnerships that are put into place with the thought process that we want to improve the exports from Pakistan. And I think so much has been done within the energy and the infrastructure sector in terms of PPP or public-private partnerships that we're ignoring other sectors which require. So for instance, the social sector, if I were to talk about it, because, in terms of education or health, again, these sectors are being ignored. And, if we want to ultimately address the sustainable development goals, we have to look at other, and I understand that power and energy is central to most, it fulfills the requirement for other sectors, but we need to not get fixated with one specific area. And I think it's important. So they have this very interesting practice in Denmark, where they've developed a hub where they incubate public-private partnerships, which is called, it's called the P4G, right? And the P4G is basically a platform where they incubate public-private partnerships. They help them innovate and grow them to a certain point. They develop knowledge partners. They take in institutions, and the P4G constitutes about 9 countries. And so 9 countries are part of this platform. There are organizational partners and they have knowledge partners. And that's how good public-private partnerships actually flourish. When you look across the board and you look at other industries that need support, and of course, those that are relevant to a country's context. So right now, post the floods, I think one of the main things that we should be thinking about is food security in Pakistan, because it is going to hit us eventually. And I think this is the point where we need the private sector and the public sector to collaborate and come up with interventions, projects, investment mechanisms to improve farming practices, build climate resilience, and see what can be done in terms of improving agricultural exports from Pakistan. I think your second question was around sustainable finance.
You can maybe give us some examples or insights on sustainable.
So we are also impact investors. So impact investment is one particular form of sustainable and inclusive finance, because it talks about investing capital into startups and organizations or ideas that can have a positive impact on society, on communities in the long run. And these kind of investments, although the return is not as fast as commercial investments, but this patient capital leads to positive impact. And this is what the market requires, where in terms of where we're standing right now. If we want to achieve goals till 2030, we have to start investing in startups and ideas and enterprises that are alleviating social challenges in Pakistan. That's what's going to help. Other than that, you have exclusionary finance, sustainable finance that is available. There are green bonds that are available. Pakistan is yet to test the market with these different forms of finance. So you either have commercial investments or you have impact investments. Also, you have institutions like Infrazaman that is funding infrastructure green projects. And as of currently, the State Bank has also provided a manual to all the DFIs and the banks on green financing and is encouraging them to provide financing to environmentally friendly projects and companies.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Shaista. I thought interesting that you mentioned, I think that was more towards the beginning, you mentioned the need also for agricultural processing, which ties in quite nicely with SDG 9, of course, which we're talking about. And we heard, I think, before as one of the outcomes of the roundtable, how many countries in the region have seen this whole deindustrialization process, and that has been particularly prone to a number of countries here in South and Southwest Asia. And we've, for several years, we're talking about structural transformation and how manufacturing is, of course, interesting, but if we're talking about moving the workforce from agriculture or out of agriculture, agricultural processing is certainly something interesting, which I think can be explored more closely. So that's an example of the red chilies. Thank you. And you actually talked about impact investment at the end, which gives us a nice tie over to the next panelist. Because I'd like to invite Ms. Lavanya Jayaram, who is the Executive Director of the South Asia or the Asia Venture Philanthropy Network. And she'll be joining online as far as I know. And will hopefully be telling us a little bit about social impact investment and how this is a necessary driver to advance or accelerate progress on the SDGs in the region. So Lavanya, you've been connecting online, I think?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you and see you. Thank you very much.
Lovely. So firstly, thank you so much, everybody, for having me on this panel. I'm delighted to be here. Wish I could be there in person, but we'll have to make do with the Zoom window. So I represent AVPN, which is a social investors network, Pan-Asia. Our mission is really to have more capital move towards impact work. And that's what we do with our member organizations who are across philanthropic foundations, corporate foundations, impact funds, DFIs, etc. So anybody who's putting in money, whether it is for profit or not for profit, towards impact work. And the reason to give you that background is that we're seeing tremendous amount of change in the way money is moving towards impact. And the entire narrative, I think, is one on collaboration. One of our primary missions is to ensure that we are enabling those unlikely allies to come together, because no one organization or country is going to be able to solve the kind of problems at scale that we have in front of us, which all the other panelists called out very pertinently. Collaborative philanthropy becomes important primarily to avoid duplicity that we are seeing. We've all heard of the SDG financing gap that's going into trillions and is exacerbating the problem of the 2030 goal achievement. And this is only going to be possible if the money comes together and avoids the kind of wastage that it tends to happen in the philanthropic efforts as well as the social investment efforts. We've talked about the interconnected nature of the key systems. We've talked about the kind of capital that needs to come in together. The other thing that, one of the panelists also spoke about impact investments being more and more prevalent. And the fact that during the pandemic, it was the most resilient portfolio amongst all natures of commercial investment. Going to say that there is a kind of faith in impact work being done. The only thing that I would point out as a trend, though, is that this kind of investment is going largely into tech-based solutions. We will and are trying to move more into efforts around capacity building efforts instead of just going in for tech solutions, because while tech is an enabler, it's not the only thing that will solve the kind of problems at scale. Two is also the high reliance, again, on data. Everybody believes there is strength in digital, there is strength in data and reporting, but the fact that investments are going only into those areas are slightly worrisome. We need to see the capital move more towards capacity building, like I mentioned, and also in terms of trust-based giving. Again, we are seeing much more, the philanthropic giving has increased by far over the past couple of years in the light of the pandemic. But to be able to give it to organizations, not micromanaging the kind of outcome and the impact, but to be able to allow for organizations to solve those problems through what we are calling trust-based philanthropy, I think is one of the things that I'd like to call out. The third area is about attracting more private capital into government initiatives. We're seeing a lot of innovations there as well. Closer home here, we've launched the first social impact bond, which was in partnership with the government and UNDP, where the government has funded a public welfare project for the first time, which is based on outcome-based milestones. And that I think is a new trend that we are seeing, but is a positive way to enable the public-private partnerships and to ensure that there is success and scale to those. Again, to the point that my co-panelists mentioned earlier as well. But I'll pause there. There's so much more to say, but a few trends that I just called out. Just conscious of time.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Lavanya, very much for your intervention. Do stay online in case there are any questions later still coming. We do have 2-3 more presentations, but I must apologize not for welcoming our chair who joined us a little later, Mr. Zafar Ul Hassan, Joint Chief Economist, Ministry of Planning. If you want to maybe bear with us, I have 2-3 more presentations and then I'll hand over to you. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Great. Next on my list, I think we have another online participant, and I am terrible at names and pronouncing names. But we have Professor Ikra Ahmed Khan, who's the Vice Chancellor of Faisalabad University. I believe he's connecting online, and it'd be interesting to hear his views on the food, finance, and energy nexus and how Pakistan is dealing with this, maybe giving us his point of view. So if I could hand the floor over to you, Professor Khan.
Thank you. Thank you very much for considering me for this forum. I'm given specific question on hearing the voices of women, youth, and indigenous people. In other words, the disadvantaged segment. And I come from a niche area from within that group, which is rural, which are always at the receiving end, because that's our last priority. There is a clear rural-urban divide. So when we look at women, youth, and indigenous people, there is a difference between urban and rural that always drives them to migrate from rural to urban areas. And that goes to the disadvantage of agriculture and food security for the bigger societal uptake. I'm also very close to link this segment of youth because I work for a university, and in university we have a youth, and I have about 30,000 students enrolled here. About half of them are women. So it's a women and youth combination. If I'm asked to look for partnerships, we would like to ask for investment in education, skill development, collaboration, and that too for enabling social mobility, creating jobs to at least slow down, if not arrest the migration. And then also, when we are saying that voices are vulnerable, then they need a platform where they are heard. And if you look at our mainstream media, whether that's electronic or print media, there's hardly any voice from the rural segment of women and the youth. About this nexus between energy and food security, the food inflation is because of energy cost. Agriculture sector is the biggest consumer of energy. And when energy goes high, so does the cost of production of commodities. And as a result, its availability in the market and access to the consumer. And the problem has been further compounded in Pakistan because of recent floods, the climate calamity. And I personally visited through several districts during this flood tragedy. And I've seen that most of those camps of vulnerable people are populated by women and young children and youth. The men are looking around, maybe moving and finding some solutions, maybe trying to find a way to, alternate income. In terms of women, I'm also witness to disparity in terms of discriminations. But at the same time, there is a very unusual observation. In Pakistan's universities and medical schools, today the women enrollment is higher than men. So what is happening here demographically is very perplexing. Who are these women? Is it really equitable representation of women? To my mind, it is not. Most of these women which we are seeing in medical schools and universities, they are actually from a segment of society which is not disadvantaged, largely. Yeah, you find some exceptions, but most of it is urbanite or people who have access to urban centers of education, because rural education is not competitive enough that could allow for this mobility into higher education and medical schools. So what we're seeing in the longer run for the employment of these women, particularly you can take the case of medical professionals, and hardly a segment of that enters into higher professional life. Most of them end up being married women and raising families. So we have to redesign their entry back to workforce if we really want to make sure that this public investment which has gone into educating women is of the benefit to the public at large. You know, in public medical colleges, the average annual cost to the student is only 12,000 rupees, whereas it costs at least 1.2 million a piece. So it's a public investment on women which is not getting benefited. Since I continue to keep myself focused on agriculture and rural side of the discussion, there is a very good case for investment in rural infrastructure, rural development, and the investment in greater human capital again is disproportionate. Whether that is for women or disadvantaged groups or youth, it is disproportionate when you compare rural and urban Pakistan. I can keep discussing this, but I can tell you that the solution lies in more investment in education scale and allowing for mobility. And also we have to see that this migration component, which not only takes away talent from disadvantaged segment, but also takes away skill as well as potential capital and investment. So there has to be some way of creating parity between rural and urban segments of the society. I can stop here.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, Professor, highlighting a little bit the importance of taking rural and urban differences into account in policymaking now, and highlighting also the challenging role that youth and particularly women also have in education and their later working life here in Pakistan, from what I understand. Thank you for that. Do also stay online, please. I'd now like to hand over to Dr. Khalid Walid, who's a researcher at the SDPI. We'd be interesting to hear your points of view as well. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Edison, and thank you so much, UNSCAP, for providing this opportunity. The nexus between energy, food, and finances exists at two levels. First level is the macro level, the aggregate economy, and the other level is the micro level, that is the household side or residential side. I think macro level has been extensively discussed at the panel. I would come to this topic from micro perspective, and that is the household perspective. At household level, I think the South-West Asia region has having almost same issues. That is, they are experiencing food security, and that is they are energy poor, and lastly that they have a lack of financial resources. So if we want to trigger energy transition, we need finances. If we want to have energy security, we need green finances. And if we want to we want to discuss the nexus of energy, food security, and finances, I think this triangle starts from green financing and finances that will translate into energy transition at household level, the residential level, so that we can achieve energy transition from traditional fuels, that is firewood, dung cakes, and animal residuals and other form of polluted fuels to modern fuels. And then we can also use innovative technologies that can be used for cooking as well. That is clean cook stoves, and that we can use clean energy cooking technologies so that we can have energy transition at household level. And this triangle, the middle point of this triangle revolves around the gender. I think if we want to use finances, we need to give finances to the female of the household, so that because females understand better that how can they manage cooking as well, and how can they manage their jobs as well, their professions as well. So that I think if we want to converge towards energy transition and green energy, I think we need to focus on gender. We need to translate, or we need to transfer our green financing towards households so that they can have energy transition. And this energy transition can be achieved through gender. We cannot ignore the role of gender at household level. So there is a nexus between food security, energy, and financing. We can use green financing, we can use financing, and we can promote energy transition so that we can have a sustainable food security system that can be long lasting and that can be sustained for the longer period of time. I think, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your brief intervention. I thought it's very interesting the way you gave us the mental picture of a triangle between energy, finance, and food, and that you place gender and the role of females right at the center of that. I think that's interesting. Something that will probably help us conceptualizing a little bit our report. I think we'll come back to you on that. Thanks very much. I have, as the last presenter on my list, which I hope is still up to date, I have Mr. Kashif Saleh of SDPI. Yes. And maybe we'd like to hear from you about how the importance, we heard before in the trade presentation, the importance of diversifying trade markets for imports and exports, but maybe hearing from you also diversifying sources of fuel and energy, how that's essentially important for building resilience to external shocks. Over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Oliver, for the introduction, and also giving me the opportunity to discuss the CSO perspective on food security. Actually, the food diversity actually connect with the accessibility of food, and it is linked to the excess of the household income, which is also related to the consumption patterns, and also it linked into the food availability patterns. So it actually defines the food security stability, food stability actually. So in a sense that I will share with you the SDPI story of change, that how the interventions help to build the food system resilience during the extreme periods, particularly the COVID-19. And this actually also applies for the floods during climate change, extreme events like floods and droughts. So if you recall back that the situation when the COVID is high and then there's a lockdown situation, so the food system supply and demand actually becomes very vulnerable, and we find that both the supply side and the demand sides become stressful. So in this scenario, actually the decision makers lack the necessary data on the food system to respond to this strategically. So in that period, that SDPI being a part of cabinet, and then the government actually provide ask the SDPI to have some strategy that the access to information can be improved. So in this way, actually in October and November, we SDPI conducted a study to actually basically understand the vulnerable part of the food system, that the farmers, the food producers, and the wholesalers, and whole transporters and retailers, all whole food supply chain. We analyze them. The purpose is to identify which part of the food system is okay, which is not, which is vulnerable, and which is very in dangerous situations. So I'm not going into detail outcome of the results of the survey, but I want to highlight that in terms of the food system information. There is a lack of data or information that how much food is produced and what are the consumption gaps. It is claimed that that we have the actual food production estimates, but it is actually less reliable in a sense that there is less information that how much food is retained at the farm level, how much food is gone to the market and then into different actors in the market. So in this way, there is also lack of information that who are most vulnerable in the food system and what are their specific need for the food requirements. So and to avoid hunger and malnutrition. So in this way, we have found a number of interesting information, but the crucial one is I just like to share with you that other than important indicators like the farm inputs like the seed, fertilizers, pesticides, water, these are important indicators of food security and food system, food production also. But the important thing which find that is the farm labor actually and the farm machinery during the extreme, which is the critical one. Because in Pakistan, there is not always the places, there is a uniform availability of labor and uniform application of the farm machinery. So that's the pockets where the farm labor is not available. So that farm actually migrate seasonally and then provide the necessary farm labor. So during the COVID, actually, we find that this link has disrupted largely, and it impacts on the food production. So in this way, actually, we collect very detailed data that within the food supply chain, where the food is produced, where it goes to different actors, means retailers and wholesalers and also it is the storage, government storage. So in this way, we built the whole supply chain. So in this, SDPI has then developed the food security portal. Actually, this is a data visualization portal which is designed to support the government to better monitor the supply and demand of the food at the district level, then the provincial level, and the national level. So if I quote the Federal Secretary comments here, so it is explained that how important is that Secretary says that in the past, most decisions in the food and agriculture sectors were based on assumptions or limited data, while now, thanks to the timely data, the food security portal has changed the way decisions are made in the sector to improve the lives of people in Pakistan. So in this way, SDPI being a CSO think tank, have government to improve their access to food security data set, and they have to improve better decisions to reach the vulnerable population. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, maybe we can actually give a round of applause to all presenters. You highlighted the importance of data in informed policy making and the data portal that you have. That's first round of questions we had to all presenters. We do have time for question and answers. Maybe I could ask the chair, Mr. Hassan, if you would like to lead the Q&A session. Sure. So over to you. See if there are any questions from the floor or online, but I'll hand it over to you. Thank you. All right. Okay. I'll take that. I see a question in the back. If you would, I think you'll be getting a microphone. If you would maybe like to introduce yourself to the audience and pose your question. All right. You have a microphone first, and then there's a gentleman behind you.
Thank you so much. My name is Mohammed Hamza, and I'm from Spatialogs, Pakistan's leading mapping and surveying firm. So I do have a question from Ram Sharma, very intelligent presenter from Nepal. He mentioned about the centralized national database. Can you please define how this database collect the local data sets and process it and involve that data set into policy making. Because this is something that I believe that not even a single country in South Asia is working on. So this is very intelligent approach from Nepal, and I believe this can help us understand. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. We have developed national data profile from federal government, and we have provided the link to local governments and provincial governments. And we have also integrate our SDG indicators to this national data profile. And so each and every level, every local levels are supposed to put the data in this portal, and we can integrate the data of the whole country. And this kind of integrated data set will give them many insights to design the different policies in different aspects. So this is newly developed. So we need to strengthen the local agencies. Some local governments, even they don't have capacity to produce the data. How can we produce the data? They can put the data easily, but how can they produce the data? This is very important issue nowadays. For example, some kind of disaster data, some kind of data related to production, they still need to capacitate. We need to capacitate them, but at least we have system. We are gradually strengthening them so that we can have more accurate data from the local agencies, and we can use it in the central policy making process. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that response. Over to you, sir, at the back.
My name is Imran Sheikh, and I'm National Coordinator, Pakistan Basmati Heritage Foundation. And I just want to comment on Miss comments on chilies, that how with chilies they have vertical integration. And I'm sharing about the Basmati integration, that we are producing rice for Ben's Original for Mars food. And we have maintained that sustainability right from farm to the fork. And in Pakistan, we have some small baby steps and success stories, that how we can convert our tractorization into mechanization, and then its integration with sustainability, productivity, and then its integration with carbon farming. Because when you promote good agriculture practices, it means you are saving people, planet, and profit. And then it's integrated with carbon farming. It is because I always believe that push is more powerful, but in Pakistan, pull is more powerful. So how we push, pull, and policy to integrate that success stories like national foods and chilies, and like Basmati, like textile. So in my opinion, the integration of agriculture with industry, with people, and public-private partnership with people, 4 Ps, are difficult, but it can be integrated with some success stories, and we should highlight. And I really second Salik's that we have not integrated our mechanization. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much for your comment. I think more that was rather than a question about forward, backward linkages to agriculture and to industry. Thanks very much for that. Are there any more? There's a question from a gentleman up here at the front. If a microphone could come this way, please. Wonderful. Or if you could just wait for the microphone, then the online participants can hear. Here it is. Thank you very much.
An MOU was signed between SDPI and the Senate Chairman Niyaz Bukhari. I myself, I have visited all the 3 centers of the United Nations, New York in 76, and Geneva and Vienna in 79. Teaching the parliamentarians right from 85 to 2022. 3 experiments were created. 3 experiments were done in Pakistan. First in the Pildet 2000 Pildet experiment. 22 years have passed. what was the result? Then we had an understanding between parliamentarians and the signing of the National Assembly Speaker Raja Pradesh Ashraf for teaching the parliamentarians on the environment and other matters. Can the SDPI tell me what 17 SDI goals were implemented, how we had 230 plan and 225 plans. Can the SDPI will tell me what the result of what the MOU signing between Major Bukhari and Dr. Sawari?
Great, thank you. Thank you very much for that question. I don't know if anyone, yes, thank you very much for that question. I don't know if anyone from SDPI here can answer that question. It was about signing of MOU, from what I understand. Also the importance of the role of parliamentarians, no, in SDG process. All right. I'm not sure anyone here has the capacity question, so I think we'll have to ask some other colleagues from SDPI. Apologies about that. Is there any more question? Any other questions from the floor? Yes, one question.
Thank you. My name is Iqbal Tabish. I have worked with both the public sector and private sector institute, including the Secretary General of the SAG Chamber and Director R&D of PCCI and senior economist with Trade Development Authority of Pakistan, and also as the CEO of the Pakistan Industrial Development Forum. This session is primarily discussing on the nexus between energy, finance, and food. We have heard the debate on both micro and the micro level as well. My pertinent question is, because of this climate disasters recently happened in Pakistan, where the more than 300 million people have been compelled to live under the open sky. About 1.5 million of livestock have washed away, and also the millions of the houses and the people have hurt. Now, when we talk about rationalization of and try to develop nexus between energy, food, and finance, middle income people that in fact have been earning monthly basis from 50,000 to the 100,000 rupees per month as well. They have badly, in fact, have been hit by this, and not to speak about. So what are the tangible proposals in the planning at the level of the Planning Commission of Pakistan and other think tanks like SDPI? So what could be the possible goals for bringing the position, restoration of infrastructure as well, which is a huge cost involved to get it restored. And the estimate says that about $30 billion have been, the economy has to face losses. How these $30 billion will be collected to restore the pre-damage infrastructure? What could be the finance departments, the efforts that as such the country has already been facing a huge financial deficit as well. So what is the synergies and how much is the linkages between the relevant ministries, and what could be the target for achieving all this? Can you please, anybody sitting on the podium can be, thank you very much for your response. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. I think I'll hand that over to some colleagues here from Pakistan, from the host country. And that said, I'll hand it over to the chair now. Yes, thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you. I think I'll answer your question later. So I welcome all the distinguished panelists and presenters of the report. And the delegates from 9 Southwest countries in the 6th Southwest Forum. So I think all delegates have enjoyed a lot during last 3 days. So it is my privilege to welcome you all. This session was particularly about SDGs 17, goal 17. It is not important because it is the last goal, but it is important because it is connecting all the dots of 16 goals. And everywhere we need the partnership both inside the country and outside the country. And it is the collective response from everybody is important during this reply to a huge challenge of SDG faced by these South and Southwest Asian countries. So, and this forum is especially important because it is happening at a time when the world economy has passed through COVID-19 and then commodity super cycle and then shocks, demand compression all around the world. And now Pakistan is especially facing these floods. And your question about the floods, okay, what the government is doing, I think this was the different in nature. This time flood, because there's a normal pattern in Pakistan of the floods after every 4 or 5 years. And these are flash flood in isolated areas, but the intensity of these floods was extraordinary. Nobody was prepared. And there was massive loss. As you have mentioned, about $30 billion erosion of livelihoods, economic activity in the not only in the flood affected areas, all other areas are facing resultant like commodity prices in Pakistan. So infrastructure is vanishing. Now the government in the process of just because the first phase of the relief was over. Now the reconstruction part, okay, how to reconstruct and how to restore livelihood in the affected areas. On this, the Planning Commission is working with all other stakeholders, especially provincial governments and World Bank, Asian Development Bank, and UN agencies. So they are preparing the reconstruction plan, okay, how to reconstruct and how for managing resources. These resources will definitely be pooled. And this is the spirit of this goal as well. Okay, pull the resources from private sector, CSOs, wherever resources lie. So we have to coordinate these resources and how far we will be successful. Then I think you will find in this report, which is just to come in a couple of weeks. So you will find that this reconstruction plan will be implemented, and this plan will take care of all these partnerships between CSO, the government, provincial government, district government. So all partnership will be taken care of. And I want to just congratulate UNSCAP, SDPI, and Ministry of Planning. They have made a lot of efforts to make this forum successful. And I think they are just successful in highlighting the spirit of the partnership building. And I have listened in this section, especially about Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Pakistan. So everybody told different stories of how they are doing about the SDGs, how they are building partnership, and they are facing different challenges. And we have especially very good experience with when we were presenting our reports or preparing our report of VNR. We had a delegation from the government of Sri Lanka and Sri Lankan friends just shared their experience, and we shared our experience. We showed how we are progressing on SDGs. So this is a classical example of how regional countries are cooperating with each other. And I was also part of earlier first forum of the South-Southwest Asian countries. And now I'm here in the sixth forum. So this forum is also useful of experience. Like today we have heard about how Bangladesh has estimated the precise how they will achieve entire 17 goals. And then we have listened from our Nepali friend about how Nepal is just sharing a national data portal, and Pakistan has also worked a lot on bridging these data gaps, and how we are establishing a traction system or mechanism. So at the last, I think because I have taken a lot of time, thank you very much, and especially for all participants who are sitting at the end of this forum, because you have another activity after that. But in this session, I think this is a useful session, and the presence and attentive audience is always helpful for this session. So thank you very much. Thank you.